So this morning, the title of the sermon is Idle Speech. Idle speech. And as I said many times from the pulpit of Hyde Park Union Church, if you help me this morning, Hyde Park Union, I won't have to work quite so hard. And even though I can't hear you, I can still see you. So there's all kinds of ways you can help me with claps and smiles, all kinds of ways you can help your preacher this morning. Idle speech. What if you could only speak 1,000 words before you died? Just 1,000 words. What would you say? Who would you say them to? Who would you not say them to? What would be so important it needed to be said? What would be so insignificant it would be a waste of life to say? I imagine many of us would be a little bit more careful with our words. We'd be a little more intentional about what we said. We'd think a little more before we spoke. We'd be more aware of the cost of saying or not saying something. How would you use your last 1,000 words? It might seem like a silly question, but that was exactly the plot of the 2012 Hollywood movie starring Eddie Murphy entitled 1,000 Words. In the movie, Eddie Murphy plays an arrogant, self-centered, fast-talking literary agent named Jack McCall. Jack is great at his job. The smooth-talking charmer is known for his ability to close lucrative book deals with celebrities. But Jack uses his gift to serve his own self-interests. One day, Jack's life takes an unexpected turn when he tries to manipulate a famous spiritual leader into signing a book deal. Interested only in the potential profits of the deal and not the spiritual leader's message, the universe decides to teach Jack a lesson and give him a problem his gift for words cannot fix. One night, a fully grown tree erupts from beneath Jack's backyard. Soon Jack realizes that every single time he speaks a single word, a single leaf, falls from the tree. Frantic for some explanation, Jack seeks out the spiritual leader's advice. The spiritual leader determines that there are about 1,000 leaves left on the tree. He also tells Jack that when a healthy tree's leaves fall off, it usually means the tree is dead. The conclusion then is that once all the leaves fall from the tree, both the tree and Jack will die. Up to this point, Jack McCall has the freedom to use as many words anytime to build his empire. But now he's got to stop speaking and conjure up creative ways of communicating without words. By the end of the movie, Jack learns to choose his words more carefully. More importantly, he learns to use his words as gifts to serve others. What if you had just 1,000 words more on this earth? What words would you choose? It would make an interesting exercise to actually see how long we could make 1,000 words last. If we counted every word we spoke, spoken words, emails, handwriting, texts, emojis. If we counted all the words we used, how far could we make 1,000 words go? In today's culture of petty shouting matches and political debating and willful neglect of facts and science, someone could use up 1,000 words in less than 15 minutes. So how far would your 1,000 words go? If I had 1,000 words before I died, then I'd only have 981 words left, since I first asked you how long you could make 1,000 words stretch. I've already almost used 100 words. It's not an easy exercise. It makes you think carefully about what words you use. It makes you be more intentional. It's crazy how fast 1,000 words go. Okay, I'm only got 863 words left. If you want to use 1,000 words more meaningfully, you can't waste them engaging in idle speech. Idle speech, I-D-L-E, is speech that is pointless, foolish, irrelevant. Idle speech goes nowhere. It's exaggerated, it's empty, it serves no significant purpose. It accomplishes nothing meaningful, it contributes nothing constructive. Right now, Americans are consumed with idle speech. Perhaps the most popular kind of idle speech we engage in is our incivility towards one another, especially those to whom we share significant difference. In the midst of two pandemics, both of which threaten permanent respiratory failure, we daily see examples of Americans using words to bully, intimidate, silence, overpower, overwhelm, deceive, discredit, and alienate. This incivility is often justified in the name of our right to free speech. As Americans, the First Amendment grants us freedom of speech. We have the freedom to say whatever we want, anytime we want, within the amendment's limitations. We live in a culture when so many Americans think freedom of speech as something that entitles them to speak without considering the consequences of their words. For so many, the right to say what they want to say when they want to say it has become more important than a genuine concern for those for whom they share difference. Ours is an era when many people worship our freedom of speech as an idol, I-D-O-L, an idol they expect to serve their purposes at the expense of others. We can think of idle speech, I-D-O-L, as the ways we use words and voices and actions to censor, control, silence, shame, minimize, misrepresent, disrespect, or alienate others as they exercise their freedom of speech. Remember when the NFL threatened to fine and punish players like quarterback Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee in silent protest against police brutality during the national anthem? Remember when police and National Guard troops tear-gassed peaceful protesters in the plaza between St. John's Episcopal Church and Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C., so the president could demonstrate in front of a church for a photo op of him holding a Bible? Idle speech is self-serving at its core. It has a long history in this country, much longer than police dogs and fire hoses ripping apart the flesh of peaceful protesters in the 1960s. At the time of our nation's founding, the right to free speech was envisioned narrowly. It was seen and is seen by many still today as the domain of whites and white men in particular. Racially marginalized communities throughout our nation's history can testify to the ways their voices have been not counted, not heard, not acknowledged. Idle speech is a culturally transmitted disease passed down since our nation's birth. Turn on the TV, get on social media, it's everywhere. We have made our freedom of speech a tool for self-interest rather than the common good and communal uplift. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 offers us perhaps a model to inspire us to engage in more constructive ways of expressing self-expression. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of the Lord hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. This passage speaks to me so much right now. When I think about all that's going on in the world, all that's going on in our country, we're living in the midst of such darkness and uncertainty and chaos. And each day, each of us have a choice for how we will exercise our right to express ourselves and to engage in free speech, to address the darkness and the chaos and the uncertainty swirling around us. And every day, we see people make terrible, careless, or well-meaning but not well thought out choices about how to address the darkness and the chaos and the uncertainty. The protests and the difficult conversations about race happening in America have made me think more critically about my own words. There have been times when I, as a preacher and as a Christian, passionately preaching about the love and justice of God, have at times been more self-serving and arrogant and impatient than I realized in the moment. In this passage in Genesis, God had the freedom to stay stubbornly silent to the darkness and to the chaos. God had the freedom to curse that darkness and chaos. God had the freedom to speak more darkness and more chaos into the world. But God chose to be loving and joyful, peaceful, kind, patient and merciful and imaginative and humble. God chose to use words to create life in the midst of darkness and chaos. Let there be light. The difference between God and any idol is that worshiping God requires us to serve others. Worshiping idols requires us to serve ourselves. Just because we have the right to say something doesn't mean it is the right thing to say. And having the freedom to speak doesn't mean we wield that freedom with compassion. And we see that lesson in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. The parable of the Good Samaritan that you heard read. The man has been robbed and beaten, is near death. A priest comes along and passes by. A Levite comes along and passes by. And then a Samaritan comes, stops, dresses the person's wounds, and takes him to an inn and makes sure he has what he needs to recover. Each of the people in this parable had the right to speak and behave and act as they did. But only the Samaritan wielded their freedom with wisdom and compassion. What makes the story even more special and moving is that In the first century, there was a long-standing tension and hostilities between Samaritans and Jews. And I can think of ways that we could imagine how we could update that story today. Many long-standing hostilities between many different kinds of groups of people today. And the Samaritan gives us a wonderful example of how a person could share differences and even hostilities with another group, but yet still choose freely in the midst of all that's going on to use their freedom and their resources to serve someone else and someone different and even someone they share conflicts with. What if we had only 1,000 words before we died? Would we really waste them in petty arguments on social media with strangers? Would we spend them trying to convince people that fictions were reality and that science was fiction? Would we use them to recite repeatedly that all lives matter instead of affirming that Black lives do matter and confessing that systematic racism does still exist? Would we really continue to argue that statues of Confederate generals should remain standing as proud legacies of our nation's history? Would we spend our words explaining George Floyd's criminal history instead of proclaiming how wrong it was that his voice was ignored while his life was suffocated? No one knows the day or the hour of their death. What tragic legacies some would leave today if today was their last day on earth. People of Hyde Park Union Church, may we live in such a way that the last 1,000 words of our life be gifts that create, that nurture, and that protect. May they not be idle or idle words or speech. May they be words that leave legacies, lives of peace in the midst of violence, and hope in chaos, and light in darkness. May they be lives and words that show people another way, that take this country in another direction. Jesus heals a man possessed by legions of demons and casts the demons into the pigs. The herd of pigs runs wildly and in a frenzy towards a cliff to their doom, but no one in the midst of that crowd offered a word that the direction we're heading is a direction leading to self-destruction and doom. Perhaps that's the point, that evil is incapable of any act that would be logical or loving. But I have to believe that as human beings, we have the capacity to choose another way, to choose a way, regardless of our differences, that leads us somewhere better, somewhere more loving, somewhere with less chaos and more light. I have to believe we have that capacity. So may we strive to live lives so that people may view your lives and remember your words and hear those ancient words from that ancient word. Let there be light. And go and do likewise.